In this video, we're going to be going over how to create primitive shapes, and there's a handful of ways to do this. Some I recommend, some I don't, but we'll kind of go over all of them. So right now, the only thing that we know is if we hold the control key and we click on a cube, we make a cube. So again, kind of what that's doing behind the scenes, let's just kind of delete all that stuff out, is normally your scene has an empty mesh in it, camera, and a directional light. We have the mesh selected. If I hold the control key, what it's going to do is, you can see these little icons change as soon as I hold the control key, is it's going to add whatever one of these primitive shapes are and all of their default settings to the currently selected mesh. So we haven't went over multiple meshes or anything yet. We really won't dive into that too much in this video. But just know if I hold the control key and I hit cube, I get a cube. Let's select all of its polygons, switch to scale, move it down, rotate it over, or I'm sorry, move it over to the left, spacebar, and then deselect everything. So now what I'm going to do is hold control, and I'm going to tap on that cube again. So it just made another cube. Grab this guy, scale him down, move him over here, hold control, and click the cube, and it's going to make a third cube. So now we have 3 different cubes all in our scene that we can rotate around. We can grab any of their edges, rotate, scale, do whatever we want to, manipulate them in any way. If I want, I can delete these out, so hit the delete key, or just grab just a certain polygon, hit delete. Now we kind of have an empty cube. Double click the whole thing, hit delete, grab this one, hit delete, everything's gone. So again, that control and click on the shape is going to put a default size shape in the center of your scene. So another thing that I have turned off that you guys might have on normally is this little grid right here. This just kind of shows you where you are in 3D space so you don't get turned around as easily. But what it's going to do is it's just going to put in the world center, so where this x-axis or the red line meets this blue line or the z-axis, it's just going to throw a default shape down. So let's grab this, scale it down, move it over. And again, we're just focusing on cubes right now. So a different way of doing this is instead of holding the control key, we hold the shift key. So again, now instead of nothing or these little green lines, you get this little plus right here. So what this is going to do is, look over here, we have our little cube, it's just called mesh. So again, hold the shift key, I get this little plus, and I click. And now what happens is kind of a few things. One, this cube disappeared, and now we can just see its wireframe. This cube appeared, and over here we now have 2 objects in the scene. So we have our original mesh that has the box in it that's just called mesh, and then it made a new one and it renamed it cube because that's the name of this primitive. So if I hold shift, it's going to add a new mesh item with a new primitive inside of it. So the other thing is it's going to add it at its default. So just so you guys know, a default cube inside of Modo is 1 meter tall by 1 meter wide by 1 meter deep. So it just kind of kicks out that default cube. So let's go ahead and delete this guy. Actually, leaving this up, this little guy right here, you can see this is the other mesh we had selected. So it's not currently selected. So this is what's known as the inactive mesh. So if I click on it, now it becomes the active mesh, and now I can grab parts of it and manipulate it. And this one, I can't actively grab. So undo that so it's normal again. So just know that you usually have an active mesh and an inactive mesh. If I want to work with either of these, I just click on the one that I want to work with. And again, we'll go into more detail about that later on. Let's go ahead and delete this initial cube we had in and go over the next way of doing it. So there are really 2 more ways of plunking a cube down into our scene. So let's just go ahead and get rid of this guy. So I'm not going to delete the mesh because I want a mesh item. Because technically you can just think of this mesh item as a container that holds polygons. If I was to delete this from the scene, now there's nothing I can put polygons in, so I would need a new mesh. So just a quick way of doing that, if you hit the N key, N is a new, you'll get a new mesh. Over here you have add item, and you can just add a mesh right here, either or. But when you add a mesh item, it's just going to be an empty mesh item, and you can tell it's empty because here we have kind of a black font. This is a light gray font. A grayed out font means that there's nothing in that item. So this third way of adding a mesh or a cube to the scene, or a primitive object. So again, all these are primitive objects. We're sticking with cubes for now. Third way of doing this is to actually left click, and now the tool is active, but there's no mesh in the scene. I'm not going to click in the scene yet. I just left click right here, and now I get all these properties right here. So these properties at first are just going to be the default properties of a cube. So its position is 0, 0, 0, or right in the center of the scene. Its size is going to be 1 meter by 1 meter by 1 meter, which we mentioned before. And its segments, or how many pieces it's cut up into, is just all defaulted to 1. So if I'm happy with these results, what I can do is, technically this little window right here is a little bit bigger. It has this little button right here. You can think of it, these little 2 arrows, as a more button. So if I was to grab this little window and scale it up, I can see all these extra tools in here. But we'll just hit this more button. It shows us the rest of the window. And right here, I have an apply button. So if I click that, it's going to apply a primitive with these settings to my scene. The other thing that I want you to notice is this little cube right here is still yellow. So the create cube tool is still active. So what I want to do is disable that create cube tool by hitting the escape key. It's not yellow or highlighted anymore. Now I know that I have a cube in my scene, and I can start playing around with this cube. So let's go ahead and delete this cube out real quick. We'll just switch to polygon mode, double click, hit delete. Now we have an empty mesh. So now again, I'm going to left click. Now let's change some of these settings. So the Y dimension, instead of it being 1 meter, so we'll make it 2 meters. So it'll be 2 meters tall. In segments, let's set all these to 2. So we can either hit 2, 2, 2. And then there's another way of doing it we'll cover later. So now we can go over here, hit apply. Now again, our tool is still active. If I was to hit apply again, it would add another cube right on top of this cube. So you get kind of messy geometry because the same thing is trying to sit in the same space as another object, which can cause problems. So we'll just hit the escape key. It drops that tool. And now we have a cube that's twice as tall. So again, the bottom half is as tall as the top half. And then it's cut into multiple pieces. So it has a cut going around pretty much the middle of each one of its sections. So these segments, what this is going to do is give me extra points that I can grab and manipulate to start making the shape that I want. So again, I can play with this as much as I want. We'll grab these edges, switch to the scale tool, scale this out. Now we have a little bit more interesting shape going on. And again, this was all possible because we had a more complicated cube to start from. So real quick, I'm just going to grab this whole guy, delete him out. So let's left click on the cube again, and let's see what happens. So my position is the same. It actually remembered that I wanted a cube that was twice as tall and broken down into multiple segments. So just know that if I want to make another one of these just like the other one was, I can just hit that apply button again, and it kicks me out that same cube. So let's grab him, move him over, hit the escape key, grab our tool again. It remembers everything. Hit apply, hit escape twice. So now I have kind of 2 of the same shape in my scene. So again, this is a really easy way at remembering what shapes you had to get multiple of the same object in the scene. Again, there's faster ways of getting more of the same thing in your scene, but right now this is just a cool way of doing it. We'll go over the more advanced things later. So the next thing, let's go ahead, let's leave one of these in here and clear this one out. Let's say I wanted to reset all my settings of my cube. A really quick, easy way of doing that is I can either hold Control or Shift and tap on my cube again. And what that's going to do is that's going to kick out a regular size cube, and it's going to reset all those settings. So if I was to grab this one, move it over to the right, again, I'm clearing out the center space of my 3D scene. I hit cube again. Now I can see all these settings have been reset. So let's go ahead and clear out our scene. Let's just left click on the cube one more time. So there's a handful of other settings in here that you can kind of play around with. You're not really going to break anything. Just know if you change a bunch of settings and your cubes are coming out a little bit strange, what you can actually do to, again, just reset everything is just hit escape. You have a weird shaped cube right here. You can grab him, delete him out, hold Control or Shift, and then just click on your cube, and that's going to reset all your settings to default. So again, it plunked in a default cube. I can delete that. Then I can left click on my cube, and again, this is reset to 1 meter, 1 meter, 1 meter. All the segments are set to 1, and all the positions are set to 0. Again, all positions at 0 means it's going to be at world center. So hit the escape key to get rid of that tool. So the few ways that I've shown so far how to make a cube are the ways that I recommend doing it. I'm going to show you another way just because students end up figuring it out and then they'll sometimes get confused by the process. So the other way of making a cube is to actually click on the cube itself. Now, instead of putting values in here or messing around with this menu at all, what we're going to do is rely on our 3D viewport. So I have the cube tool active. If I left click and drag, what it's going to do is it's going to start dragging out a portion of a cube. So now we have effectively a plane. I can rotate around, there's no back. Go to the front, I can grab this arrow, and now I can move my cube around and say, okay, where do I want to place it? I can grab these little handles. So if I was to grab this one right here, this blue one, and pull it out, that's going to give me thickness for the cube. Grab this one, it's going to make it thinner, taller. So again, this is me just dynamically building the size of cube that I want. So there's a handful of reasons not to do it this way. Again, it's not the end of the world if you like doing it this way, but I hit the escape key and I have my cube. It's not different than any other cube realistically that I could create. The only thing that's really undesirable about this is it's no longer kind of sitting in this world center. When we go over other tools like symmetry and whatnot, that's going to be something where you're going to need this kind of sitting at world center right there. And again, you just saw it's not impossible to recenter something, but just to make your life easier, it's usually easiest to go in. Now we have kind of all screwed up settings, so I can either reset the settings like I've shown, or I can go in and change these manually. So again, position, all of these were set to 0. All of these were set to 1 meter. So instead of clicking on this and doing 1 meter, 1 meter, 1 meter, if I actually hit this little square right here, this will change all values. You see all these are highlighted now. Now I can hit 1M for 1 meter, hit enter, and then I can hit apply. If you don't want to hit the apply button because it's in this little more button, the other thing that you can actually do is hover over the 3D viewport with your mouse. So I'm not clicking or anything. Just hover over it and then right click once. And what that's going to do is it's going to plop the shape right down into the scene with your given settings. But again, it's still an interactable tool that I can make it taller. You see these numbers are changing over here as I do this. I can hit undo or Control Z to take it back to that normal cube. But when I get the cube that I want, I can hit the escape key and then we're good to go on this. So we've only really messed with cubes so far. So the other primitives I want to kind of focus on for this video would be a sphere, a cylinder, and a cone. There's some other shapes in here that you can kind of mess around with these if you want. We'll probably go over them at some point, but right now we're going to stick to the kind of basic ones. This guy is going to be a sphere or a ball shape. There's going to be kind of sides and segments in here. So let's just, again, hold Control, drop in our default one, left click. So our default settings for this is going to be kind of a 1/2 meter by 1/2 meter. The sides are going to be set to 24, so the number of edges going kind of around the circumference or the equator of this guy. And then segments, or the lines going up and down, is going to be set to 12. So we can change these to make our sphere kind of more spherical. Again, a cube is a cube, but let's just take a look at these numbers real quick and drop this down to like 8, drop this down to maybe 6, hit apply. So now this is kind of a lower polygon or a lower face count sphere. It still tries to mathematically be a sphere, but if we look at these, you can see there's kind of flat edges on here. This one technically would still have flat edges, like this guy is still a flat edge. It just looks more round because there's more points in there to make it look a little bit more curved. So kind of a difference with dropping shapes. If I hit the apply button, I'm kind of stuck to the shape that I just put in. Hit escape again, and now I just have this shape. The other way of doing it though, where I left click, hover over the 3D viewport and right click, you'll see that it has all these little widgets here. So this is the active tool that I can modify. Again, if I hit the apply button, I don't get access to this. This is only if let's reset this real quick. Select my shape, hover over the 3D viewport and right click. Now I have kind of an interactable mesh. I can take the sides, set those to 12, hit enter. You see that it automatically updates. Take the segments, I don't know, we'll set these to 100, hit enter, and now we can see how dense this is. The other thing that you can do, you can see that I'm doing right now, is you can navigate around your scene. You just want to be careful that you don't accidentally left click on the background, because again, that's going to potentially manipulate your shape and do some weird things. So we'll just hit undo a few times to get that back. But if I'm holding Alt, left click and drag, I'm using the modifier keys so it knows that I want to actually look at my shape as opposed to create more shapes in a sense. Take this to 6 and it reduces it. So let's just put it back to the default of 24 by 12. So the other thing that the sphere has is there's different types of spheres. This is a globe sphere, so you can see the top of it has a point, the bottom of it has a point. Again, both these have points. If I go from a globe to a quad ball, this one's a little bit weird. It says subdivision level 0. If I step up, it'll make it more and more round. It also has a tessellation sphere, so this is a sphere that's made completely out of triangles. So a globe is almost all quads, but on the top, and again, I'm sorry, by quad, I mean a 4-sided polygon, and a triangle is, again, a 3-sided polygon. So a little bit of lingo for you there. So a globe is going to have all quads, except for the top and the bottom is going to be a collection of triangles. A quad ball is going to be a mathematically created sphere based on all 4-sided objects. So again, this is a cube. If we were to cut it up and then say spherize, I guess you could say once, it's going to look like that. Cut it up again, cut it up again. So we just keep cutting it up more and more. And again, if I look at this, it's made out of all 4-sided square polygons. Switching to a tessellated sphere, this is going to be a similar scenario. It's just going to create a sphere based on triangles as opposed to quads. So again, we'll just go back to a globe. That pretty much sums it up for spheres. They're not super complicated, so let's delete those out. Cylinders, extremely easy. So left click, right click. Now we have, so I can actively change this around. I can change how tall it is. So now it's 750 millimeters or 3/4 of a meter. I can change this to 500, hit enter. That kind of shrinks it down. Its sides are currently set to 2. I'm actually going to get rid of this grid so it's a little bit easier to see. Our sides are set to 12. I can pop that up to 24. Now this is significantly more round. Knock it all the way down to 3. Now it's essentially a prism. 4. I can just hit this little arrow key. 5, 6, 7, 8. So normally with these shapes, you usually want to stick to even numbers. We'll go over that later. But then the segments is currently set to 2. If we set that to 1, that line that was cut through the middle goes away. If I set it to 30, now there's a bunch of little segments cutting through this. So we'll just set that back to 0. So again, there's some other weird stuff in here. We really won't go over anything too crazy at this point, but feel free to kind of mess around with this, make any shape that you want. So now we have a really, really big one. And then just remember, if you ever need to reset it, hold Control, click on the shape. I'm just going to hit the A key to zoom back in on it. And this is going to be our default cylinder. It's going to have a bunch of edges going around this way and a bunch of edges going up and down this way. And then up here, oops, sorry about that. It's just going to have a big polygon that's just a big circle on the top and bottom. Let's go ahead and delete this guy. So again, I'm using this lasso. I just use it out of habit. I don't even realize I'm using it. We're going to have a different video that goes over how to use that. But again, usually I just double click on the object. So the next shape is going to be a cone. Left click, has the default settings, right click. So again, we've kind of went over this enough to, I guess this is one that you could kind of just play around with. I can change the shapes, change the number of sides and segments to whatever I want. Change it to 3. Now we get kind of a prism that meets at a point. Knock these segments down. You can really just kind of have fun with this and experiment. But just know kind of my recommended way of making any primitive shape, the way that I do it personally, is I choose my shapes. Let's do a cube. I left click, hover over the 3D viewport, right click. That throws a cube in. If I need to modify it, I then can. So let's make it a 2 meter by 2 meter cube. Sides and segments, I just want all of these to be set to 3. Hit enter. Or this one, if I want this one to be a little bit higher, set that one to 8. Hit enter. Then I'm happy with my shape. I can hit spacebar or escape. It'll drop that tool. And now I have a shape that I can start modeling, manipulating, doing whatever I want with. So again, that kind of sums it up for these primitive shapes. They're realistically pretty easy. There's a lot of different settings to get the hang of with them. But just know, again, I can hit Control and reset back to my primitive shape at its default settings. So that pretty much sums it up for primitive shapes. I would just mess around with these and just get a feel for dropping primitive shapes. Have it to where you have one cube, drop in another shape. The other thing that might happen is if I get a cube and I drop in a cube on top of another shape, technically if they interact with each other, it's not really a big deal. I could potentially make a cube that's really big, so it's 3 meters, right click. Now I have other shapes inside of other shapes, so at this point I'm just going to move him out of the way, grab him, move him where I want, grab him, move him where I want. So just know that you can have shapes inside of shapes. They won't actually bump into each other. They'll just kind of slide through each other.